The crime wave in Britain is getting out of control and it's spreading beyond London. Tunbridge Wells, of all places, an 80-year-old woman has just been murdered, stabbed to death by a 20-year-old who is in custody. All over the country, oftentimes in places like Bournemouth that you would never associate with high violent crime, people are being stabbed and shot on a daily basis. And the government, the Home Secretary, she has no apparent interest, more interested in cracking down on tweets on social media. Her police force raided Sarah Wilkinson with 12 officers at dawn in traditional fascist style. Many of the police officers wearing balaclavas to arrest a 61-year-old woman over a tweet. A woman, moreover, who is highly respected across the country. An entirely peaceful woman, doing her best to uphold international law whilst being arrested like a criminal. Her bail conditions were, well, telling. She is never to use a mobile phone or a computer all the time she waits trial, which may be some considerable time, if it ever happens at all. Seems unlikely to me that Keir Starmer, the man who let Jimmy Savile go, the man who tried to deliver Julian Assange to the tender mercies of the United States of America, will win many trials in front of a jury. The rampage goes on in France. Pavel Durov released on bail, millions of euros of bail, travel restrictions, 2 calls at a police station per week for the crime of owning a platform that will not allow the French security services a back door into other people's information, considering that that would be a breach of the ethics on which the platform was built, a breach of the ethics which the users of Telegram signed up for in the first place. The owner of Rumble just made it out of Europe on time. France has banned the use of Rumble. Can you believe it? The European Union is considering similar measures against Elon Musk, the owner of the X platform, formerly known as Twitter, all because he is refusing to crack down on freedom of speech to the extent that Western governments demand. All the things that the Western world used to allege about other people's countries are now so standard, such a daily routine, that nobody even mentions them, not least because nobody ever reports them. If you're not on one of the dwindling number of social media platforms available to you in your country, then you won't even know about them. You may not know, for example, that Twitter has just been banned by the supposed leftist government of Lula in Brazil. The judge is going to charge you $10,000 per day if you are caught using a VPN to continue to use Twitter. Somebody came up with a wheeze. Sounds to me like quite a good one. If we all get a VPN and set it to Brazil, that's going to drive the authorities crazy. Sounds like a good idea to me. In Germany, the disastrous administration of little soldier Schulz, the little pink-faced social democrat, and Anna Baerbock, his bonkers green foreign minister, is now fast running out of time. The AfD, the German Nationalist Party, running on a platform of repairing relations with Russia, of ending mass immigration, of halting the deindustrialization of Germany, in part caused by the German collusion in the explosions that destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The platform of the AfD is striking a chord with the poor German citizenry. That much is obvious. when you've got a government that cares more about other countries, more about Ukraine, more about Israel than it does about Germany, you cannot be surprised if the German people fall out of love, insofar as they ever were, with Baerbock and with Schulz. But the breakthrough for the AfD this evening seems certain to be the first regional election victory forming a regional government in Germany since the Second World War. Lazy pundits call the AfD fascist, although the fascism that is clear and presently a danger to freedom in our lands is all coming from centrists and social democrats. After all, what does fascism mean other than stamping on the face of the people, denying the people the right to speak freely, to think freely, to act in support of their thoughts and their feelings? That is fascism, is it not? So it's the pot calling the kettle black. But the main reason why the AfD is on the march in Germany is the catastrophic economic situation in that country, coupled with, twinned ineluctably with, the absolute crackdown on free speech, free assembly, freedom of thought in Germany. If you don't incant the mantras of liberalism, greenery, quackery, and wokery, then you are ipso facto a fascist. The problem is that if the people begin to vote for the people you're calling fascist, in part because it's you who's behaving like the fascist, where does that all lead us? There's some groundbreaking testimony out tonight. I haven't yet read it and can't dwell on it, but it does, on the face of it, appear to be the case that my friend Mélenchon was tricked, was fooled by Macron in the recent parliamentary elections. The so-called New Popular Front, led by Mélenchon, made secret deals with Macron to stand their candidates down in key constituencies in the second round of voting, on the clear assumption that a government, including the New Popular Front, would be founded as a result. Not only did Macron renege on that deal, not only did Macron refuse to recognize the result of the election, this week he held talks with the far-right French nationalist leader, Marine Le Pen, with a view to finding a prime minister acceptable to her. You see, scratch a liberal, you'll always find a fascist. On the face of it, this greenery, quackery, wokery, it all seems so achingly, bone-achingly liberal and politically correct. But that's only a mask. When the time comes, liberals will always lean towards fascism rather than towards the politics of someone like me, or someone like Sarah Wagenknecht, the leader of the new party in Germany, which is espousing politics very similar to my own politics, but is proving rather more successful than my politics have turned out to be in Britain so far. Not that the politics of the Workers' Party are in any way dead. On Monday, I'll be putting the finishing touches to our brand new headquarters in the northwest region of England. We're fighting by-elections for council seats from as far apart as Lochee in Dundee, the parish in which I was born, and the Harrow Road constituency in London. If you support me, if you support my politics, then make your way to those election campaigns and make a difference. Politics is not, will never be only about tweets and statements on social media. In the end, Elections have to be won, and they can only be won face to face, door to door, person to person. The situation in the Middle East catapults ever further towards disaster. Everyone knows what's happening in Gaza. Everyone with the vanishingly small number of social media platforms, that is. But not much attention is being paid to a new Holocaust underway in the West Bank, where millions of Palestinians live, under the supposed protection of international law, under the supposed supervision of the so-called international community. Land is being seized, buildings are being burned, families are being pogromed, murders are continuing apace. F-16 jets are bombing refugee camps, not in Gaza. That's a commonplace. But in the West Bank, the difference between the two being that whilst Hamas were in control of the Gaza Strip, there is no Hamas in the West Bank, giving the lie, if it were necessary, any further to give the lie to the idea that this was about October 7th or that this was about Hamas. The Palestinians in the West Bank are not represented by Hamas. They did not break out of their concentration camp on the 7th of October last year. They did nothing to even remotely justify the pogroms that are taking place there now. The head of the Israeli Intelligence Office himself called it a pogrom. He himself said that the Israeli settlers were out of control, and the Israeli government's answer is to send thousands of their soldiers, never mind the ragamuffins of the settlements, their most moral army in their thousands have invaded a territory they have controlled since 1967. And some fools say that there's no intention of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Well, there is. If they could, and they might, they would drive every last Palestinian from the historic land of Palestine, from Gaza into Egypt, where the diminutive tyrant Sisi claims that he will not accept them, to the kingdom of Jordan, where the diminutive tyrant says he will not accept them. Tyrants both, dwarves both, moral, political dwarves both may very well find millions of Palestinians inside their domain by force by the time all of this has ended, and nobody is doing anything about it. We were told it was all about the hostages, but Israel is massacring its own hostages on a daily basis, murdering 5 of them only yesterday, and trying to blame it on the Palestinian captors. Nobody with any sense believes such guff. Why would the Palestinians murder 5 hostages that are worth more than their weight in gold in terms of a trade-off if and when any ceasefire negotiation ever comes to pass? The US officials quoted this evening say that Netanyahu is not really interested in a ceasefire, is not really interested in an exchange of hostages. Next, they'll be telling us that the Pope is a Catholic and that bears defecate in the woods. 100,000 people are on the streets of Tel Aviv this evening, demanding a ceasefire, demanding the release and exchange of hostages. There's a general strike in Israel tomorrow. Who knew that any trade unions continued to exist in Israel? But all of their members will be on a general strike tomorrow to try to bring down the Netanyahu government, or at least to force that Netanyahu government to parley, to exchange hostages. 3 times now I've talked about the exchange of hostages. Because while the world continues to obsess about the fate of a comparatively small number of Israeli hostages, many of whom have now been killed in the last 11th month of frenzied bombardment, several times the total bombardment of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nobody talks about the almost 10,000 Palestinian hostages held in Israeli dungeons without trial, without charge, seized entirely capriciously. One man who was released 3 days ago was re-arrested today, even though the shocking physical and mental state of the prisoners coming out of those dungeons, if and when they ever come out, is enough to turn your hair as white as the incarceration has turned theirs. 10,000 Palestinian hostages, and nobody gives a damn. My last word is on Keir Starmer. He carefully picked his candidates. Only the top-class candidates could make it through the sieve marked Sir Keir Starmer. He dismissed people on the eve of the election for tweets that they'd made or even liked 10 years before. Everybody was pristine except the honourable member for Ilford, who was revealed by the BBC, no less, to be a slum landlord, renting his tenants houses filled with mould and damp and ants and other vermin. Labour sticking by him. Lucy Powell, the so-called leader of the so-called House of Commons, backed him on television this very morning. A Labour Party whose top members of Parliament are not just landlords, but rogue landlords, foul landlords, of the kind that Labour once upon a time pretended to despise and make political war against. The truth is, the country was never in love with Keir Starmer. Less than 20% of the population of Britain voted for him. He got a much smaller share of the vote, millions fewer votes, than his much maligned predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, whom he stabbed in the back to the point of political death. Keir Starmer was never loved, but he has rapidly become hated. His stealing of the cold weather allowance from Britain's old age pensioners, his keeping of the 2-child cap on child benefit, ritually denounced whilst in opposition, has consigned millions more children in Britain to poverty. 4 million children in Britain will go to bed hungry this evening in the 52nd day of a Labour government, which just said everything is going to get worse before it gets better. No wonder the likes of the AFD and the Front National in France prosper. When you see what the Liberals can do, why not go for the genuine article? Sadly, that is the conclusion that the voters in Germany have reached this evening. Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.